There was no medical condition that caused this as an accident. There was no mechanical failure of the car. That even if Mackenzie intended to also die in this crash, that is irrelevant. A failed suicide attempt is not a defense to murder. So she's sentenced on count 2, the murder of Davion Flanagan, 15 years to life. She's sentenced on count 1, the murder of Dominic Russo, 15 years to life.
July 31st, 2022. A quiet Sunday morning in the wealthy Cleveland suburb of Strongsville, Ohio, was shattered by an explosion so violent that nearby residents thought a bomb had gone off. Flames towered into the air as a speeding Toyota Camry wrapped itself around a commercial building at nearly 100 miles per hour. Inside the wreckage were 3 teenagers.
Radio, 3 occupants.
2 of them would die almost instantly. The third would crawl out alive.
Radio, the driver is breathing, unconscious. She's alive. We got to get her out somehow.
At first, investigators believed it was another tragic high-speed accident involving reckless teens. But as detectives began piecing together the final moments before the crash, the story became darker, colder, and deeply disturbing. Security footage showed no attempt to brake, no signs of swerving, no evidence of panic. Instead, prosecutors would argue something horrifying: that 18-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla intentionally drove her car into a brick wall, killing her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend, Davion Flanagan. The media called her Hell on Wheels. But behind the headlines was a complicated story involving teenage obsession, emotional instability, toxic relationships, privilege, manipulation, and a crash that sparked national debate over whether this was murder or simply reckless immaturity spiraling out of control. This is the story of Mackenzie Shirilla and the deadly crash that destroyed 3 families forever. Mackenzie Shirilla was born on November 6, 2003, and raised in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. By most outward appearances, her life looked stable. She grew up in a middle-class family in Strongsville, a quiet, relatively affluent community known for good schools and low crime. Friends described her as intelligent, emotional, and deeply attached to the people she loved. But behind the social media photos and suburban normalcy, there were signs of instability simmering beneath the surface. Her parents reportedly had a turbulent relationship, and family tensions affected her emotionally during her teenage years. People close to Mackenzie later described her as someone who struggled intensely with rejection and emotional abandonment. In school, she maintained average grades and participated in normal teenage activities. She wasn't considered dangerous, she wasn't known as violent, but emotionally, people noticed patterns: possessiveness, mood swings, impulsive behavior, and dramatic reactions during conflicts. By high school, Mackenzie had started dating Dominic Russo. Dominic, born in 2004, came from a loving and financially comfortable family. Friends described him as athletic, charismatic, and outgoing. He played sports, had a wide social circle, and was generally viewed as well-liked and ambitious. But the relationship between Mackenzie and Dominic became increasingly volatile. Friends later told investigators the two frequently fought, broke up, reunited, and repeated toxic emotional cycles common in unhealthy teenage relationships. Text messages recovered later would reveal emotional dependency, jealousy, and manipulation from both sides. The relationship wasn't abusive in the traditional sense, but it had become emotionally explosive. Then there was Davion Flanagan, Dominic's close friend. Davion was known for his humor and loyalty. Friends said he often acted as the peacekeeper within the group. He had dreams for the future and was described as respectful, easygoing, and protective of the people around him. None of them knew they were approaching the final weeks of their lives together. In the summer of 2022, tensions between Mackenzie and Dominic escalated dramatically.
I need to break
I will
the
key your
doors,
car if you do not let me in the house.
You're gonna key my car if I don't let
If you don't let me in the house, yes.
What the
Investigators later uncovered evidence suggesting Mackenzie feared Dominic might leave her permanently. According to prosecutors, the relationship had reached an emotional breaking point. Then came July 31st. In the early morning hours, Mackenzie picked up Dominic and Davion in her 2018 Toyota Camry. The three teenagers drove around Strongsville while exchanging messages and hanging out. At some point, surveillance cameras captured the vehicle speeding through residential streets. Witnesses later reported hearing the engine roaring unnaturally loud. The car accelerated faster and faster until it reached nearly 100 miles per hour. Then, at approximately 5:30 a.m., the Camry veered directly into a brick commercial building near Alameda Drive. The impact was catastrophic. The engine compartment collapsed inward instantly.
Engine's still pretty warm, so it can't be too. Oh, that's fair.
Flames erupted around the vehicle as metal twisted violently around the passengers inside. Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan were trapped. Neither had time to escape, but somehow, Mackenzie survived. And investigators would soon begin asking the question that changed everything. Was this really an accident, or was it intentional? The crash scene looked more like the aftermath of an explosion than a traffic collision. Inside the wreckage, investigators found the bodies of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Autopsy reports later revealed both teenagers died from blunt force trauma, thermal injuries, and smoke inhalation caused by the impact and resulting fire. The injuries were devastating. Dominic suffered catastrophic fractures throughout his body, while Davion's injuries indicated he likely died almost instantly during the collision. Meanwhile, Mackenzie Shirilla survived with severe injuries but remained conscious. That alone immediately raised questions. How had the driver survived a 100-mile-per-hour impact while the passengers died? Investigators from the Strongsville Police Department and crash reconstruction experts began analyzing every second leading up to the collision. The findings became central to the case. Data recovered from the Toyota showed the accelerator remained fully engaged moments before impact. More disturbingly, there was no evidence of braking, no skid marks, no steering correction, no attempt to avoid the building. Prosecutors argued the vehicle traveled in a straight line directly toward the wall. Then investigators uncovered the emotional context surrounding the crash. Text messages between Mackenzie and Dominic revealed escalating relationship problems in the days before the collision. According to prosecutors, Mackenzie displayed obsessive attachment and extreme emotional reactions whenever Dominic distanced himself. Detectives began developing a theory that Mackenzie intentionally crashed the car in a murder-suicide attempt after relationship turmoil with Dominic. The media exploded. National headlines described the case as a modern suburban nightmare. Some portrayed Mackenzie as a cold manipulator. Others argued she was a traumatized teenager, suffering a mental health crisis. Public opinion split almost immediately. Some people believe no teenager would intentionally kill her boyfriend and his friend.
Okay, so I just watched Crash, and I am solely convinced that she is innocent.
Others pointed to the evidence. No brakes, no swerving, full acceleration.
So in my opinion, whether she did it on purpose or not, which I believe she did, it really doesn't matter. The evidence proved that she was driving the car. Her negligence caused an accident that killed 2 people.
Then came the arrest. On November 2nd, 2022, prosecutors formally charged Mackenzie Shirilla with multiple counts of murder, felonious assault, and aggravated vehicular homicide.
You're under arrest for aggravated murder ×2, okay? Nobody's gonna ask you any questions. Nobody's gonna bother you. Can I have your key, please?
The charges stunned the country because this wasn't being treated as reckless driving. It was being treated as intentional murder. Defense attorneys argued there was no direct proof Mackenzie meant to kill anyone. They claimed the prosecution relied heavily on interpretation and emotional assumptions rather than undeniable evidence. But prosecutors believed the digital evidence, crash reconstruction, and relationship history painted a clear picture. As trial preparations began, the victims' families publicly grieved the unimaginable loss. Photos of Dominic smiling with friends, videos of Davion joking with classmates, took two teenagers whose lives ended in seconds. And at the center of it all sat Mackenzie, recovering physically while facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison. The case had evolved far beyond a car crash. It had become a psychological puzzle, one that the courtroom would soon attempt to solve. The trial of Mackenzie Shirilla began in 2023 before Judge Nancy Margaret Russo in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. From the very beginning, the atmosphere inside the courtroom felt emotionally suffocating. Graphic crash photos filled giant courtroom screens. Jurors listened to testimony describing burned bodies, shattered bones, and the final moments before impact. The prosecution argued Mackenzie acted with a mission of death. Crash reconstruction experts testified that the vehicle's path was deliberate and uninterrupted. Prosecutors emphasized again and again that there had been no attempt to brake, no hesitation, no survival instinct, just acceleration into a building. Then prosecutors introduced emotionally charged evidence from Mackenzie's relationship with Dominic. They argued she feared abandonment and spiraled psychologically after conflicts with him.
In your car, do not let me in the house.
You don't see my car.
If you don't let me in the house, yes.
The defense pushed back aggressively. Attorneys argued Mackenzie herself nearly died in the crash, which they claimed contradicted the idea of calculated murder. They portrayed her as an immature teenager involved in a tragic accident caused by recklessness, not intent. Supporters of Mackenzie insisted prosecutors were criminalizing mental instability and teenage emotional dysfunction, but the judge saw it differently.
To a look ahead to a local case that's drawn national and international attention. Sentencing will take place tomorrow for 19-year-old Mackenzie Shirilla.
On August 14, 2023, Judge Nancy Russo delivered the verdict. Guilty. Mackenzie Shirilla was convicted of murder for the deaths of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan. Inside the courtroom, family members cried openly as the verdict was read. The judge compared Mackenzie's driving to a missile intentionally aimed at a target. The words sent shockwaves across national media. Weeks later, Mackenzie was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison.
So she's sentenced on count 2, the murder of Davion Flanagan, 15 years to life. She's sentenced on count 1, the murder of Dominic Russo, 15 years to life, to be served concurrent to each other, with credit for time served.
During sentencing, emotional victim impact statements filled the courtroom. Dominic's family described birthdays spent visiting graves instead of celebrating milestones. Davion's loved ones spoke about empty bedrooms, unfinished dreams, and permanent trauma. Mackenzie, now facing adulthood behind bars, appeared emotionally detached at times throughout proceedings, something critics interpreted as coldness, while supporters argued it was emotional shutdown caused by trauma and medication. Even after sentencing, debate around the case never truly ended. Was Mackenzie Shirilla a manipulative killer, a suicidal teenager, a reckless driver unfairly turned into a murderer? The case became a cultural flashpoint about mental health, privilege, toxic relationships, and how intent is determined in modern criminal law. Today, Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan are remembered by family and friends as young men whose futures were stolen in a single horrific moment. And Mackenzie Shirilla remains one of the most controversial young criminal defendants in recent American true crime history. Because in the end, the most haunting part of this story isn't simply the crash itself, it's the silence investigators found before impact. No brakes, no fear. Just a straight line into darkness. The deaths of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan left scars that will never fully heal. What began as a late-night drive between teenagers ended as one of the most disturbing and controversial criminal cases in recent years. And even now, people still debate the same terrifying question. Was this murder? Or a tragic act of emotional destruction spiraling out of control? If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deep dives into real criminal cases, courtroom mysteries, and disturbing true stories, make sure to subscribe. Leave a like and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode. Because sometimes the most terrifying crimes aren't committed by lifelong criminals, but by ordinary people in a single irreversible moment.